At the start of the 20th century, Mullingar was part of the United Kingdom. The majority of people in the town were nationalists who hoped for autonomy, but they would never have imagined that within 20 years they would be living in an independent state. In 1901, at the time of the census, the population of Mullingar was about 4,500. It was a largely agricultural town, and there was a weekly market in which butter, cheese, eggs and other goods were bought and sold. There were also a number of important fairs in the town, including cattle, horse and sheep fairs. There were a few small home industries such as brewing and coach building. And you had businesses like blacksmiths, but most people were employed in services or in institutions. The railway was a very significant employer in Mullingar in 1900. It employed up to 700 people. Other major sources of work included what was then known as the district asylum, now St. Loman's Hospital, which was almost a town within a town, employing hundreds of staff. It had its own farm and its own shops. The army barracks was also an important source of employment. Politically, Mullingar was predominantly nationalist. The local government reforms of 1898 had led to the creation of Westmeath County Council. Its first meetings were held upstairs in Mullingar Courthouse, but in 1913 they moved across the road because in that year a new purpose-built county buildings opened. And these county buildings were built on the site of what had been the county jail, which closed in 1900. The first chairman of Westmeath County Council was Lord Greville, who was also the landlord of Mullingar. He lived just outside the town at Clonhue House near Loughoul. And Home Rule was eventually granted. A Home Rule Bill went through Parliament in the early summer of 1914, and there was tremendous excitement in the town. There was a procession along the main street with people carrying the green flag of Ireland. Bonfires were lit everywhere, and all the houses in the town were illuminated. There were no supermarkets in Mullingar in 1900. Instead, people went to small shops, most of them family-owned. The nearest thing there would have been to a supermarket in Mullingar in 1900 would have been the Lipton store, which was in Oliver Plunkett Street, as it now is. The trade directories of the time and the local newspapers give a sense of the very wide range of businesses that then existed. There were butchers, dressmakers and grocers and tailors, watchmakers, chemists. Prominent shops in Mullingar as the 20th century dawned included P.J. English's Medical Hall, P.J. Weems's Wool and Hides business, James Chute's Watchmakers, Nooney and Sons Ironmongers and hardware stores. The telegraph was the fastest method of communication, and telegrams could be sent from the post office, the railway station, and on race days from the Mullingar race course at Newbrook. Technology was beginning to change the life of Mullingar people by the 1910s. In wintertime, the streets were a quagmire of mud and manure, and in the summer, the dust was everywhere, and the town commissioners deployed a water cart to try and keep the dust at bay. But the era of horse-drawn carriages was actually coming to an end. From the 1880s, the bicycle was an increasingly popular mode of transport for many, and by 1905 there were 13 motor cars, and 20 motorcycles registered. And at that time there were very strict rules. Motorists were obliged to always give way to horseback riders. And given these restrictions, it's probably not surprising that even up to 1914, when the First World War began, most people chose to use horses or bicycles rather than cars. The most common way of travelling outside of the county was by train, and the railway station was a very busy place in the early 20th century. There were 6 trains each way between Mullingar and Dublin every day. Mullingar railway station was considered one of the finest on the Dublin-Sligo rail line. It was the first station outside of Dublin to have a subway, and it was the first building in Mullingar to have electric light, which was installed in 1900, and this was seen as a symbol of progress. And the town had an active town tenants organisation and a working men's club. Many local women belonged to an organisation called the Women's Health Association, which was set up by the very radical Vicereine of Ireland, Lady Isabel Aberdeen, to educate on issues of hygiene and better health care. Lady Aberdeen herself visited the town in 1908, and there are a number of houses named in her honour, the Lady Aberdeen cottages. And although the nationalist question tended to divide the people of Mullingar because most Roman Catholics supported Home Rule, most Protestants did not, but both communities generally got on quite well, and they joined together to promote the cause of temperance, which was one of the big issues in Ireland at the time. The Catholic and Protestant clergy in Mullingar advocated abstinence from alcohol, and the Catholic clergy helped to run what was known as the St. Mary's Temperance Club, and visiting priests ran temperance missions. There were similar organisations within the Protestant churches, particularly the Methodist community, but attempts to supply temperance refreshments on fair days met with very little success. There was a temperance cafe set up in the town in 1913, but it lasted only a year. The Mullingar licensed Vintners Association proved to be much more powerful than the local temperance campaigners. Now, the army barracks was an extremely busy place, particularly when the First World War began in 1914. Mullingar during the war was a major training base for the thousands of men who volunteered for Field Marshal Kitchener's new army. And in 1918, Mullingar became the depot for the Leinster Regiment, which was the main recruiting regiment in this town going back well into the 19th century. Soldiers trained at the Newbrook Racecourse as well as at the barrack and the adjoining field known as the Camp Field. And during the First World War, North West Meath, including Mullingar, had one of the highest recruiting rates in the entire United Kingdom. There were over 2,500 men from this area serving in the army by 1915. And in the course of the First World War, almost 10% of the male population of the town, some 300 men, were killed and many more were injured. Quite a number of local men also won military decorations, including 2 winning the highest medal available, the Victoria Cross. In 1917 there was a huge Sinn Féin rally held in the town, and it was attended by Eamon de Valera, who had just become president of Sinn Féin, Arthur Griffith, who'd founded the party, and many others. And the first member of the Irish Home Rule Party to defect to Sinn Féin was the local MP Larry Ginnell, who'd represented Mullingar in Parliament since 1906. In 1919, Mullingar was visited by two very famous people, the pilots Alcock and Brown, who crossed the Atlantic in just under 17 hours, the first transatlantic flight. It was a very remarkable feat. They'd landed in Clifton in Galway and travelled across the country on their way to Dublin to return to Britain. Some of the biggest crowds ever witnessed at Mullingar railway station turned up to honour these brave men, and Alcock was given a model airplane as a present by a local man, and he showed off that model airplane to the world's press in Dublin a few days later.